And I was like, they are very.
That's an old book now.
Oh,
It
yeah.
is old. And I said, I'm on, oh, okay,
Let's go.
okay. Good morning, or good morning. Good morning. How is everyone? Good afternoon. Welcome to sunny Florence, Oregon. For some of us, this is great. There's no smoke in the sky and it actually is cool enough you can enjoy outside. So we are thrilled to be here. Unfortunately, the mayor left, but we had an opportunity this morning to go on a tour with the mayor and with some of the city, I guess he's the Public Works Director, and see some of the projects that were in the community. I think the highlight for us was we actually got to have lunch with our ODOT crew. So I forgot to say today is, I don't even know what day it is. What day is it? Is it July 31st? July 31st. So welcome. Welcome, commissioners. We see you up there and hopefully you can hear us fine. Great. So today, this afternoon, we're going to do a workshop, which is a little bit out of the ordinary for us, but we have so much work in front of us. We felt like we need to split up the day a little bit and add some additional things that have been bothering us and that we've been pondering on. So we're glad we're finally going to be able to do that. That said, I think at this point, we're going to move forward and I'm going to invite, who we have? Tova, Peltz, Amanda Peets, and Amy Joyce up to do our safety workshop. Oh,
And Lindsay?
no, Lindsay.
Leah and I, that's okay.
Oh, you first? Well, you didn't write this down. Yeah. So I'm having a hard time following what's going on, but ladies, welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Tara from the Commission. I'm Leah Horner. I'm the Assistant Director for Operations at ODOT. And I am actually super excited for this workshop today and the focus on safety. I think as you all are aware that we talk a lot about safety, but then I think when you look at things like the strategic action plan and it says save lives, like I think we're all in on what that is, but now I think we have the opportunity to have more of an informal discussion about what are the values that kind of drive us into the safety conversation and how we make decisions with the tools that we have, both with policy and investments around what that safety conversation should look like. So I realize that we've got a whole bunch of people sitting behind me here ready to talk about safety, but I really hope that this conversation today is a dialogue. I hope that we do some brainstorming and I hope that we really come out with a better understanding of how we all see our safety values and how we can anchor to that in the future. With that, I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Thanks, Leah. Good afternoon, members of the commission. For the record, Lindsay Baker with the Oregon Department of Transportation. So I really am just going to double down and underline and maybe boldface all that Assistant Director Horner just mentioned, which is, I think we recall had an initial conversation back in May in Ontario a little bit about safety, and I think really recognizing that safety is far and away our top priority, and also how do we make that concrete, how do we make it tangible, and what does that mean to operationalize that within the organization. I think as we've recognized and I think reflected in the past, and I'm thinking a lot about how we've developed our strategic action plan, 2 different versions of the strategic action plan and really emphasizing safety, and how are we really putting a laser focused priority on what that means and how we move it into the planning and the programming and the investments and turn it into actions and real outcomes that are saving lives at the end of the day, right? What does that path from A to B look like? Maybe from A to Z look like? I also am reflecting back on conversation we've had earlier this year around legislative concepts. So we're introducing our partnership with external stakeholders, our partnership with the legislature about how are we being innovative, how are we being creative, and how are we broadening out that sort of context and the scope to make sure that we are looking at how all of these things are really connected and again driving into outcomes that are deliverable and actionable by us and by everyone across the state. So I'm really eager for this conversation, and I think, as Leah mentioned, really looking at a dialogue, brainstorming. This will be the first of many, but the hope is that this will really articulate and I think crystallize how we're able to deliver that work over the next months and years. I am also thinking a lot about how we are coming forward in the 2025 legislative session, thinking about transportation funding, thinking about maintenance, operations, and safety, and what does that look like, again, discreetly and specifically and concretely, and how are we setting ourselves up to evaluate what programs we have today, what our work looks like today, and then how, if we are successful, and hopefully we will be, I am certainly optimistic and confident that we will be successful in 25 session, how are we able to really put all of that funding and put that investment and that priority from the legislature to work for Oregonians. So again, really excited and clearly energized by this conversation. And with that, I think we will bring the rest of the team up and really dive in. Any
Okay.
questions from the commission? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Peets, Administrator for Policy Data and Analysis Division with Oregon Department of Transportation. And likewise, want to carry this energy through this workshop session because safety is such an important topic. We talk about it as the #1 priority for the organization and really want to embed it in everything that we do. And yet we are seeing some trends and data that I shared at the last meeting that show that we're heading in the wrong direction as a state. And this is something, unfortunately, that's being seen nationally as well. And so I think part of the goals of having this workshop are really to acknowledge what this data is telling us and say that we want to put more concerted effort towards how we address these things. We recognize there's a problem. We are taking active steps. We want to make sure that we're thinking about things comprehensively. So I think the feedback from you all will help us as we think, what are those things that we need to be thinking about? How do we do business different to try to get to the outcomes that we've set in vision and in policy? I talked a little bit last time, you all as a commission have set this transportation policy around safety by adopting the Oregon Transportation Plan, the Transportation Safety Action Plan, and some of those guiding documents that really say, what is our policy for the state of Oregon? A lot of those do circle around what's called a safe system approach that Federal Highway talks about, and that does recognize that humans make mistakes. So there's only so much as roadway entities that we can do to make our system safe. But people are human and they do make mistakes, whether that's driver distraction, impairment, or other issues. And so our job as a transportation agency is to try to reduce the severity of injury and crashes and reduce the number of deaths on our transportation system through engineering, through education, through other programmatic and investment decisions. And so you'll see kind of the suite of that as we have the conversation today. I'll also mention briefly that the Transportation Safety Action Plan will be updated. It's a federally required document, so the update to that starts this next year. So there'll be another opportunity to refine and revise the policy. But I think this conversation today is really, we have the policy framework here and established today. You have that in your packets. How do we take that and how do we operationalize that and put that lens on everything that we do? We talk about the lenses of climate safety equity. How do we operationalize that? We have a number of actions in the strategic action plan. If someone was to look at that, they might say, that's all you're doing around safety? No, those are the newer things that we want to put additional effort towards that get us towards our goal. We have a pretty comprehensive safety program. You heard about some of our data side of things last time that we had this conversation. You'll hear from Tova today about some of the more programmatic elements and some of the things that we're pursuing there. I'll just review real quickly what some of the data is telling us and why that's a challenge and why we want to spend the time today. So we're seeing the highest number of fatalities than we've seen in over 3 decades. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is something that's not unique to Oregon, something that we're seeing nationally. In 2022, we had 603 deaths on Oregon roadways. In 2023, that dropped a little bit to 586. Now, this is all roadways, not just ODOT. As we look at kind of the distribution between deaths on ODOT roads, deaths on local roads, it's about 50-50 with slightly higher on state roadways. We see a pretty significant increase in crashes at intersections. So think about some of our urban areas, some of our vulnerable road users like bicycles and pedestrians at those locations. And then we also see an increase in run off the road or roadway departure crashes. And so some of the programs that you'll hear about today, I think, target those specific types of things that we're seeing in the data. We also are seeing an increase in crashes for bicycles and pedestrians. Pretty significantly, around 40% increase from previous years in terms of number of people killed there. And then we also see disparities, that some populations are more vulnerable to being killed, walking, biking, or in a traffic accident. So how do we think about protecting all users of the transportation system? So that's part of what I think the data and information can be really helpful in doing. And really what we strive for is data-informed decisions. A lot of the programs take this information, we try to use it real time, we try to adapt what we're doing to the changing conditions that we're seeing out there. And that's not only on roadways. As we talk about safety as an organization, we think about work zone safety for our own workers on the roadways, some of the staff that you met today in the maintenance stations, as well as our motor carrier division and making sure that freight operators are safe, that the vehicles are safe that they're traveling on. So there's many dimensions of safety. I think what we're going to narrow in on today is really around addressing those big increases in risks and crashes that we're seeing, and how do we pinpoint that.
Tova Peltz, Deputy Division Administrator for Delivery and Operations. Back in May, we shared policy and data collection and behavioral work that's going into safety, and we want to talk today a bit about the capital improvements we're making on the system that are focused on safety. So we're going to go back to the materials that we shared back in May that we didn't get to, and that was all shared in the packet. We've also taken the agenda for this workshop and the values and broken them up into slides. So we'll walk through those as slides, but you should also have those in your packet. So hopefully, it makes it easy for everybody to follow along in this setting. So let's see. I want to, if I can control things. Yes. Which way am I pointing? There we go. Okay. So I want to start out, as I said, going back to some of the materials we prepared for the conversation in May, but didn't have the opportunity to share, to dig into the capital improvements that we're making and the tools that some of the tools we've used to prioritize those improvements. One of the foundational tools that we use is taking all of the data that we collect about our system and using it in the safety priority index, putting it in the safety priority index system. And this is really our approach to assessing safety problems across the whole system, not just on our highway, not just on the state roads, but on local roads as well, and highlighting locations that have a high frequency of severe crashes in particular, and then using this analysis to prioritize locations for investments. And this directly feeds our All Roads Transportation Safety Program. Yeah.
When you're looking at I use, for example, the location crash frequency, are you able to look at what the cause of the crash was?
Absolutely. All of the data points that are in the system have a suite of more detailed information about the causes of the crash analysis, and the frequency of crashes in particular locations would bring those locations to raise those locations up as hot spots for us to look at more closely and prioritize for investment. And we'll look at the type of what is contributing to crashes at that location, and that will help inform what kinds of solutions we can make in those locations.
Thank you.
I'll also just note quickly that any one crash may have multiple causes. So speeding may be a factor, at the same time distraction is a factor. So multiple of those indicators are combined as we look and review the data.
So we use this tool to inform a lot of our prioritization across the state, not just like one single program. So this tool is used across across our agency. We're gonna go from here to digging into some other tools that we use to inform the development of our capital projects. And then we're going to talk about a variety of different programs we use to fund capital programs, both longer term projects and short term projects. So projects in the STIP, as well as projects like our rapid improvements and our vulnerable user crash response.
Commissioner Smith.
Oh, thank you. Commissioner Smith? I didn't see your hand.
It's okay.
But go ahead.
Thanks. You said that, we all are aware that there's been an increase in crash throughout the country.
Hold on, we
It's hard
can't,
to hear you.
is there a way to turn?
We just turned her.
Okay, go ahead. Try again, Sharon.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, thank you.
We all know that there's been an increase in severe and just crashes in general. Is there any particular, cause that we're seeing arise, the type of reason for the crash that is on the rise as opposed to other types of reasons, like distracted drivers, that's going up, or impaired drivers, that's going up? Do we have that kind of information?
Actually, both of those are true. Distracted drivers, impaired drivers, and speed are all our top contributors. And then we tend to see on rural roads, road departures and crossovers being primary cause on rural roads, and crashes in intersections in urban communities.
But there isn't any one category of causes that is markedly higher than the others. They're just all going up.
You want it?
So we are, for the most part, seeing them increase across the board. So the information that is in the packet from the previous May discussion shows the causation. And so if you look across those, I want to say that majority of those categories, I think in particular, driver distraction and impairment are the ones that have increased the most. Speeding certainly isn't a factor and has increased, but not to the same degree as those other two.
Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah, just in, the written comments that you have here, I think the one sentence that we say we know that driver distraction, impairment, and speeding account for most of Oregon's traffic deaths and serious injuries. So we agree that that's the case. The other thing, just as a suggestion, as we've been making our rounds and the commission's had a chance to sit down with our teams, our operations teams, and chat. These operations teams are the ones that are dispatched to these traffic accidents. And today I was thinking, as we were listening to one of our employees talking about this, I think it would be really good for you to spend some time interviewing those of our employees that are out responding to these crashes, because the data tells one story, and I think that there might be some anecdotal stories with regard to what's happening for those that are out there as first responders that might be helpful in this too. Because unfortunately, as it turns out, there's no doubt an employee that shows up at every one of these fatalities and serious accidents. And so we've got some firsthand accounts that might really make the data more robust in the way we interpret it.
I think that's a great point. And one of the things that we're developing in a couple of slides, we'll share more deeply our vulnerable user crash response program, which was established in 2023, through a series of decisions and direction from the commission. Really leans into engaging maintenance in developing, looking at solutions and identifying looking at specific locations where there have been crashes or severe injury, or fatal crashes or severe injury crashes that involve vulnerable users in particular. So that's bicycles and pedestrians, bicyclists and pedestrians in particular, and engaging in what kinds of solutions can can address the situation that led to the crash. And I think it's more of a partnership between our engineers and our maintenance teams to develop solutions, which I think is a similar step in that direction.
So if I may, as you were speaking, Commissioner, another thought was coming to mind too, where a lot of the data information we have on fatalities, serious injuries come from crash reports. Crash reports are filed when there's a certain amount of property damage, but they're not filed for other things. So we've also done some work to gather some additional information so that we're getting either minor crashes or near misses or some of that type of information too. Some comes from a partnership with Oregon Health Authority and getting EMS data and other information when those services are called, but necessarily a police report isn't filed. The other information, and I think to your point, Commissioner, is through our staff are well aware of some of these situations. Sometimes they're called out when there's just a small fender bender or something like that. Not necessarily a crash report, but they're seeing the frequency and the patterns, which I think is essential to get ahead of some of the safety needs, is not just identifying where we have problems now and they're major, but starting to identify some of those risks as well.
So I'm gonna keep going through the slides a little bit here, if I can, there we go. So again, like sharing the tool that we have, a resource that we've developed to inform how we're advancing capital projects. We completed our first vulnerable user safety assessment in 2023 last year, and that was intended to look at the types of factors that contribute to fatal injuries and serious injuries among vulnerable users, and so like across the state. And so vulnerable users, as I said before, are typically a person who's unprotected by a vehicle, and so that's most often pedestrians and cyclists. But the intention is that that the assessment looked at the types of factors that contribute to those crashes, and that helps inform the types of solutions that we can make on the system. This assessment was an outcome of the Transportation Safety Action Plan that Amanda previously mentioned, and as she mentioned, the TSP will continue to be updated, and the vulnerable user road assessment will continue to happen and the outcomes will continue to inform how we make investments. Additionally, we have a number of other tools and resources that we've built specifically to help us prioritize and identify the kinds of investments we want to make to see benefits in terms of safety. So we've developed this context-sensitive design to that priority and the safety priority index for enhanced crosswalks. Really focuses on crosswalk spacing and ensuring that all of the infrastructure at a crosswalk, curb ramps, the pedestrian push buttons, that all of those are functional and accessible, and helps define what the design criteria for that. I think that we're trying to build a toolbox of resources to inform the improvements that we make and ensure that those improvements have the intended benefits of improving safety. And in this case, we're really we've really been leaning into our most vulnerable users. We've also been leading the country in contextual speed setting methodology, which gives us some tools to has codified some tools to specifically in some cases reduce speeds based on the context of the road, what the corridor land use looks like, proximity to residential areas, schools and other resources, and often results in lower speeds, which improve safety. So I think all of these are tools intended to drive our capital improvements and how we prioritize our capital improvements. I'm gonna shift.
Tova, I got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
As it relates to speed, because we know that speed is a issue. Speeding in my world means that you're traveling over the speed limit, but it could be that the speed limit is improperly set, or the speed limit is set too high, in which case we have somebody that's driving the speed limit or below, where that speed could also be a factor in the accident. So I was just thinking about the comments that you were making here relative to the proximity to vulnerable people, kids in schools, school zones, as an example. So have you taken a look at speeding versus speed in looking at the data?
Well, I think that we have some specific.
Did that make sense?
It does make sense, and we have some specific examples of where we've reevaluated speed limits in corridors based on context and have moved forward with reducing speeds. And we've done that in a number of cases in the last several years. And I know there's more conversations happening around how we go about doing that. I think that we certainly have the tools to reassess speed limits on corridors based on context. And I think the conversations we're going to have here in a little bit about values, I think that really feeds into it. And I think we can perhaps that's something that we want to specifically call out as a value we want to put more attention on and prioritize as an agency. So I guess I'd say let's hold on to that thought and come back to it when we dig into values. All right, the All Roads Transportation Safety Program. So this is, I would say, our most funded safety-specific capital program, and the arts program is federally funded and is data-driven, using that SPIS data that I had mentioned before to identify priority locations. This program is in its fourth cycle of projects now. We've been delivering projects through the arts program for quite a few years, and if you recall back to our tour in Ontario, we stopped at the roundabout. We stopped at the roundabout and looked at the roundabout, and that was an arts funded project. It was an arts hotspot, so a location where there was a history of intersection crashes, and the identification that it was a priority location to make that kind of safety investment. So this program allows us to take our crash data and do site-specific analysis to determine what the appropriate safety improvements are to improve safety. And one of the things that's unusual about the arts program with the federal funding is that it's a program that funds both projects on the state system and the local system. So this is a program that truly is statewide. And in our conversations with Federal Highway, it's been notable because it serves both the local and state system. And since we know that crashes are split pretty evenly between the two, being able to make those investments is really valuable across both. The program also is split it's split 50-50 between local and state highways, so the funding goes to both places, and then it's split between hotspots and systemic improvements, which means that a hotspot, the Cairo Junction roundabout that we looked at in Ontario is a good example of a hotspot. A systemic improvement is something like the rumble strips we see along fog lines around all over the state. Those are systemic improvements. So they're corridor wide, and they address systemic safety issues in the case of rumble strips, road departures, or rumble strips in median crossovers, providing system-wide improvements on safety. We do have a number of different kinds of systemic investments that we make statewide. And one of the things that is also a little bit unusual about our systemic improvements is in a lot of cases, they're really a partnership with maintenance, because they're delivering the types of improvements that otherwise that prior to this maintenance would deliver with state highway funds. And so this is actually, I think in a lot of ways, a way that we've been able to make safety improvements on the system using federal funds and identify being able to make bigger investments that without putting that on maintenance. The systemic program is also split up. Some of it goes to roadway departures, and that references the rumble strips I mentioned. Intersection improvements, and then part of that funding also goes to bike and ped improvements. So we have enhanced crossings around the state for bicycles and pedestrians in a lot of cases that are also funded through the arts program. And those projects are often bundled along with other kinds of funding as well, so you can see like broader benefits. So shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about some of the things we've done with state highway funds over the last few years. In 2021, following a series of severe crashes on 82nd Avenue, the commission moved to initiate a pilot and dedicate $10 million towards rapid improvements on some of our most dangerous corridors for pedestrians. There were 4 corridors that were selected, and over between 2021 and 2023, a number of improvements were made on those corridors for pedestrian safety in particular. In these photos, it's maybe a little bit hard to see, but the top photo underneath the speed limit 30 sign is a speed feedback sign. The speed feedback signs were a big part of the rapid improvement. We find that being able to communicate what like speed folks are driving helps remind them to slow down and drive within the speed limit. Through this program, we also did a number of improved crossings, median islands, protected crossings. Did a lot of striping, like visibility striping and crosswalks for pedestrians as well. This was a pilot that the commission directed to look at how many improvements we could make on a faster pace. Like the arts program is a STIP program. It's like sort of in that 4-year STIP cycle, so it can take several years to design and develop a project and then deliver it through construction. The intention of the rapid program was to deliver projects within roughly within a year. We've spent about $6 million from of this the original dedicated $10 million, and some of the money that remained went to rapid improvements that we made in the Powell Boulevard corridor in Portland, following a bicycle fatality in 2022. So let's see. Back. There we go. So some of those funds also went to Inner Powell, to Southeast Powell Boulevard in Portland. These improvements also were on a pretty rapid pace, and these were in partnership with the City of Portland, TriMet, and Portland School District, specifically to look at a suite of improvements that could be made on a really rapid pace in that corridor to improve safety for students crossing back and forth near Cleveland High School and Preston School and Kellogg Middle School in the corridor. This was I think a successful use of state highway funds and on a rapid use of those funds to make improvements. This is a corridor where we reduce speed. We also reduce the speed limit on 82nd Avenue in the first part of it. So a little bit of a different approach to capital improvements.
So when we talk about success for me is reduced accidents. Have we taken a look at these projects that we've done and see how much of an improvement we've made? Are we measuring the results as we put these into place? Because these ones you're talking about were huge opportunities for us to really improve safety.
No, that's a great question. I think that we continuously are collecting data on where our crashes are, and we should see in the locations where we've made investments, we should see reduction in crashes. A lot of these improvements have happened very relatively recently, and I don't know off the top of my head whether I don't think we've seen repeats at those exact locations where improvements have been made. But I think one of the challenges of a lot of these corridors is there are many crossings and there are many different places that the folks are on the system and crossing the system. And so we've had many conversations with the community, especially on Powell Boulevard, about all of the places we could be making investments in the corridor. And I think they've been challenging conversations because like, we make improvements in like, we prioritize locations and we make improvements in those locations and then something happens like blocks away. So I would have to look, like, I'd have to go back and look at like the Powell corridor now versus 3 years ago to see like how different, like how the numbers have shifted. I think that like, we continue to make improvements on Powell, and I think that on Powell and 82nd, there are some ongoing projects. We are still partnering with the city of Portland, and so that $10 million that was initially dedicated, $6 million was spent on those first 4 corridors. We have about $1 million that is committed to Powell, and we've spent about 3/4 of that to date. The city of Portland is still working to deliver speed zone enforcement through cameras. And that's been an ongoing conversation and work with the city of Portland over the last 2 years. And those cameras should be coming soon. And that will be another layer of improvement in the corridor. So it's a great question. I don't have an immediate data answer for you, so I can come back to you on that.
Yeah, it might be a data point because we're measuring crashes. Maybe we should be measuring somehow lack of crashes. Because, the data point is a crash, but it would be really interesting to know our success rate for lack of crashes. Does it, again, sorry if I'm not making sense. But...
No, I'm tracking. I am
Okay.
tracking, and I think it's a great question. And I think that the conversation in this again comes back to we're going to talk about values and what we want to what work we want to prioritize in the what upcoming work we want to prioritize. And I think that looking back at where we've made investments, especially because the arts program has been around now for several capital program cycles, and we'll reflect back on how those improvements have performed, how the rumble strips have performed, how the roundabouts are performing. We should have the data to show the benefits. Short story is there are many places around the state where we want to make safety improvements, and we don't have enough, we don't have the funds today to make all the improvements that we want to make. So let's go back here. So the last piece of capital investment I wanted to share, we've set up the Vulnerable User Crash Response Program that is also state highway funded with about $3.5 million a year. This program is the follow-up to the rapid improvement pilot that we did. Coming out of that pilot, we did a study to look at how can we make rapid improvements and how would we prioritize rapid improvements in the future, and that research evolved into the Vulnerable User Crash Program. And so the intention of this program is to respond after, following a crash that is a severe injury or fatality that involves a vulnerable user. We have a team from the region, from the region traffic units, from maintenance and headquarters, our traffic safety team that will look at the crash and reflect on the crash report and all the circumstances that led to that, and develop ideally some recommendations and a design concept for what kinds of rapid improvements could be made, and then put those rapid improvements into play. This program was established in late 2023 and kicked off in just this past January 2024. And about a month ago, the first project was identified for funding, and so that's a series of improvements on 101 in Reedsport. So that'll be the first project we see come out, we delivered through this program. This program also has a systemic element where we're looking at priority corridors and systemic improvements that we can make on using state highway funds. So, but the key to this program is that it's intended to respond to a crash respond and review the crash within a month, within that month after it happens, and identify opportunities for improvement, and then advance funds to make those improvements through the region, in a partnership with maintenance, so that we see improvements on the ground within a year. So that is again a faster pace and much more in line with that pilot we did in 21 and 22. All right, So I think this is like our intention is to shift from this conversation about like wrapping up the conversation we started in May and the examples of things we're already doing and shift to a conversation about values and how we all sort of push in the same direction collectively to make safety improvements on our system moving forward, anchoring into the same values. So what we've put together is a list of about 15 value statements about safety on our system. And what we wanted to do is walk through them with you and talk about them, get your feedback.
Commissioner White.
Yeah.
Have we've talked different things here, the critical intersections, those hot spots. Have we got a log of those hot spots and what we estimate the cost of fixing those are in some kind of prioritized manner?
Yeah, so the log of the hotspots is really through that SPIS, index. And the regions have we built lists by geographic area of the hotspot locations, and through our the building of our STIP, we will select a series of hotspot locations. And generally, we will scope them and look at what we think the best solution is and what it would cost to deliver that solution. And we do a cost benefit analysis to sort of identify, we do not have money to deliver all of them. And so in any given funding cycle, we're having to pick and choose which hotspots we're advancing. One of the things that I think could come out of the conversation today is definitively saying, let's invest in making a list of all of the intersections where we would like to make, look at roundabout improvements, for example, because that's an established intersection improvement in a lot of cases, or all of the urban intersection hotspots. And let's intentionally work on cost estimates and a prioritization methodology for those. At this point, we evaluate them through STIP cycles and through the ARTS program.
It strikes me, I mean, the number that you have here, $3.5 million, and maybe that's not the whole number.
That's just for this vulnerable user crash
Okay.
program. The ARTS program is.
I would like to have just sort of a magnitude scale of what are the list of the most critical things in some kind of rough priority order and how much is there. So, I mean, we ought to, as we're looking ahead in general, if we've got those kinds of things, we should be making some decisions about safety based on that, where are people getting hurt, where are people getting killed, obviously, and we probably need to address that. And it strikes me that having that kind of information as the legislature has that discussion would be very helpful.
Director.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, Chris Strickler, Director of the Oregon Department of Transportation. So I just want to add to that point. We have a lot of data, and if you look at historic processes, we really want to make sure that we have the data accuracy. We want to make sure that we can assign where potential impact and cause might come, all of the factors that they've been describing here. And I think what we're seeing is that the data and the process has historically led to a long, protracted outcome, right? So we know the areas, we know where the hotspots are, we don't have the funding to get to all of them, but even the funding we do have takes too long to get it on the ground. And I think that's one of the priority areas that the Commission recognized the better part of a couple of years ago to say, these investments are a real impact to people today, and we need to get them on the ground today. And so part of it was carving out a portion, but to your broader point, that is just a small portion of it. And I think going into a 25 discussion, we should be able to carry forward all of the data and all the project areas that we need for a safety improvement. I don't mean other types of projects, but I mean those safety-focused projects, because we do have the background of the data.
Well, Chris, I'm thinking, I'm sure there are lots of examples, but the two that strikes my mind that we recognized, decided was a priority, and went very quickly was cabling the medians between that. There was one very prominent accident in Portland that led over just a couple of years with an allocations of fund to get that done. Another one was from I-5 into Corvallis, I think that's 34. There was a lot of crossover accidents there, and so ODOT put, solid medians in between there, and I think we've all but eliminated deaths on that route now. And that happened very quickly, so the demonstration is we can act quickly if we identify the problem.
Absolutely, and the thing that I would add to that is we absolutely want to make the data-based decisions. But you have 5,000 professionals that see this every day.
Yeah.
And we should also be able to make some judgment calls to get these things moving quicker because we know that it's going to be a problem and we know circumstances in that area may have changed. In some cases, land use around a specific intersection may have changed so significantly that a problem that didn't occur or didn't appear to be present last year has now had 3 incidents this year. And we have to be able to adapt to that, to your point, because we do have the ability to move them quicker. The process has typically been slower, but the team's been really working on trying to find ways to shorten those process elements. And I think one of the values that they're, I think, getting to in the discussion today is what are those areas that you think we should even be moving faster on and that are priority?
Thank you, Director. That was spot on. All right, so I think we want to shift over to the conversation about values. I'm going to go back a few slides here. The seed questions in the materials for this workshop. We posed these three questions to the commission to prompt your thinking about the values and the workshop discussion here. So I want to go back to these 3 questions and find out, get your feedback right now, and then dive into the values, and we can come back to these questions also as we walk through values. So I guess based on the list that we provided, and if you're through the materials, the list of values was, I guess, following the end of the letter. It's also in the back of the agenda. So there are 15 values. If you've had a chance to look through them already, and and you see gaps, share what the gaps are, and we can capture that. And if something's already jumped out at you, we can would be great to hear that. But I think unless there are comments, we'll start walking through those 15 values. And the 3 of us are tagging a little bit.
Did you want to start with the comments, or did you start?
Yeah, go. Let's start with the comments.
Take a crack?
Go ahead.
Okay. So the first question, are there any missing? And I've got one that I'd like to suggest. We can't do this by ourselves. We need other state agencies to join us in this. And the reason I raise this is that if we take a look at speeding as an example, if OSP is not on board with us, and we're not getting the speeding laws, enforced for whatever reason, they may have other priorities. There's nothing we can do about that. So they need to be on board. In terms of impairment, if it's alcohol or cannabis, chances are we as a state have sold it or licensed it to be sold. So the OLCC probably needs to join us in this as we have a discussion with regard to impairment. Resources relative to transportation of injured motorists, OHA probably, has could join us in a goal. So I just mentioned these 3 off the top because if we could get other state agencies to buy into what we're trying to do, then we might get a multi-agency approach to this, and we might get a whole bunch of others digging in to assist us in this goal, because I don't think we can come close to it, doing it ourselves. And maybe this is really a statewide initiative with a whole bunch of other participants that could have this enter into their discussions about what they're trying to do relative to values. The other piece, well, let's see. You want us to, would you like to talk about the all three questions at once, or
How about this? Let's talk about, like any other values that are missing, and then let's dive into the values and talk through them, and then we can, I'm hoping that like a top 3 or a top 5 will sort of rise to the surface over the course of our conversation. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. We'll see how it goes, and then we can like come back to these questions. Is that all right with folks?
Before I lose my train of thoughts, I just want to agree with Commissioner Baker. I do think if you look at the two biggest causes, they're speeding and distracted driving. I think I'm right on that. Both of those are enforcement issues, not generally engineering issues. And so I think finding ways to address the speeding and, contrary to what I believe for the last 20 or 30 years, maybe some of the answer to the speeding problem is some kind of automated system to look at that. And the red stoplights kinds of things on the intersections, because the reality is we don't have enough law enforcement. It's not their priority, and we will probably never have enough, and it'll never be their priority to deal with this on a sustained basis. They do it on pilot basis. So we have to look at, one way I think we have to look at a better relationship with law enforcement, whether it's OSP or, and really within the cities, it's the cities and the counties, and have a better relationship and discussion about it with them. And then maybe looking at the technology that strikes me is, because that's really, how do you slow people down, and how do you get them not to be looking at their darn phone while they're driving? Is the real big issues. And to me, that's probably the priorities. Now there's some design things that you've got here that'll work too. Obviously, traffic circles or roundabouts do work, but they're incredibly expensive, and we're not going to be able to use a lot of them. Although City of Bend seems to have figured out that they like those a lot.
So getting back, I lost sight of our other two commissioners. I don't know if they had
Did we
any
lose
other,
them?
they're on there somewhere, I'm guessing. Just wanted to
They're
make sure, they're there. Sometimes we forget you're over there, so wave your arm at me. But was there any values that you felt were missing? Either one of you.
Alicia first.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Chapman.
I wouldn't say that there are any that I think are missing. I agree with Vice Chair Meyer that we need to stay in our lane, so to speak, and try to add value where we actually can make a difference. And I'm concerned that there are things like distracted driving, or people that are houseless, that are living in the medians, that are in danger of being hit. Those are tragedies that we should do everything we can to work with the appropriate agencies to address, but I think that isn't really something that ODOT has a lot of control over. And maybe it's public service announcements or something that we can do in tandem, but I'm not really sure, especially with our limited funds. And that's really the biggest concern that I have is, are we diverting energy from things like, safety issues in the maintenance of the highways that actually lead to accidents? That's kind of it.
All right, and then, I don't know if Commissioner Smith, if you had anything.
Lost her again.
Yep, she's there somewhere.
No, I don't have anything
Okay.
that I think we're missing here. I think I agree with the comments that we need to focus on the areas where we have control while, collaborating with our agency partners. I particularly am interested in, I think, impressed by the rapid response when we know there's a severe intersection or stretch. And I think focusing on getting that rapid response rolled out is really, has been really a good thing for the agency to do.
Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and look at your list and talk about.
Okay, so we summarized the potential values into 4 categories for discussion here. I think as we look at these things, and Vice Chair Byer, given some of your comments, we often talk as transportation professionals about the E's. I think there were 5, now there's 7. I don't know how many there are now, but there's quite a few. But I think it is a combination of engineering, education, enforcement, evaluation. Safety has to be comprehensive on all those things for many of the comments that I think you were sharing here. So now jumping into some of the values, I think, again, these are not trying to set policy. You did that within the Oregon Transportation Plan, some of the other policy documents. It's how do we operationalize this and how do we see this on the ground in the day-to-day things that we do. So some of the things that Tova mentioned, and then potentially more in building and cascading on some of those things. So as we look at this, we've talked in the Transportation Plan and in the Strategic Action Plan about looking at addressing disparities, that disparities exist. That's something I talked about back in May when we had a safety conversation, that we've done research projects. This shows that there's a higher propensity for people of color to be killed walking than a white person. So we are seeing disparities, that they exist, that they're having a real impact on safety, and how we paid attention to some of these things. I give an example of how we're looking at maybe trying to integrate some of this type of value is within our Great Streets program. Y'all talked about hotspots a little bit ago. We created some maps where we're overlaying that SPIS data. We're overlaying what Tova talked about as some of the critical crossing needs, and a number of other factors to see where do the highest needs overlap and how do we start to address those. Embedded within that is also what's called our social equity index. And we look at geographic areas across the state where we have high populations that are low income, communities of color, others that experience disparities, so that we are very intentional about trying to address some of those things. So that's an example of how we can roll that out. The next one is prioritizing rapid safety investments. I think we've talked about that. I think heard some support for programs like that where we can be very responsive and adapt quickly, as Director Strickler mentioned. One of the ways that we try to do this is, I talked about last time, our real-time map, where every night we're updating deaths on our traffic system and we're showing where those locations are. Then we have the Rapid Safety Improvement Vulnerable User Task Force that reviews those. So there's a group that's actively looking at that data and saying, working with engineers and saying, what's the solution? How do we address this? How do we have a strike team that addresses those issues that are emerging and changing kind of constantly on the system? Then we have a piece on really looking at building from our data and information, some of which I shared earlier today. So really recognizing that there's different needs and solutions in urban areas than there are in rural areas. Some of those are going to be systemic. Some of those are going to be rumble strips, for example. That is to address those roadway departures. Obviously, a huge area where we're seeing increases, something that we need to address. I think Vice Chair Byer, to your comment on adding the cable barriers, this is something that's also extremely effective when put down, can be kind of a lower cost solution. And if we put that across the state, have more investment in that, we see dividends in terms of saving lives. In urban areas, that might be a roundabout. That's the intersections where we're seeing those intersection increase. So how do we differentiate the types of solutions for different areas? Because it's not one size fits all. And then next, prioritizing investments that increase safety of our most vulnerable users, where we are seeing increases, 55% increase in bicycle fatalities and serious injuries, a 40% increase in pedestrian serious injuries and fatalities in just the last few years. And so that's something then we need to put concerted effort into how do we focus on that. I mentioned before the kind of critical crossing needs. That's something that we're also identifying as we start to get into some of the needs conversations around safety. And as we have some of these legislative conversations, that has to be baked into it because it is addressing what we're seeing in the data side, that the vulnerable road users are at risk. And so how do we address those on a systematic way?
So we also identified a number of what we're calling programmatic values. So we're looking at how we will align behavioral education with safety project investments. most recent example, I think that is a great example. We have the opportunity through NHTSA grants to do to do education projects. And those need to be delivered in locations where there's a known safety issue. Well, we also deliver projects in locations where there are known safety issues. And so what we've been trying to do is partner up those NHTSA grants with our capital projects and deliver education, whether that's in the form of billboards or special materials when we do project open houses that are focused on the behavioral side of safety and educating the community about how the capital improvement will change how folks need to travel through those improvements. Most recently on I-84, we had a series about a dozen projects that are happening over a 5-year period, and we used a NHTSA grant to do some billboard work specifically and outreach to the communities that are traveling through the I-84 corridor to alert them about all of that construction and inform them to keep an eye out, keep your eyes peeled for construction workers and folks on the ground. So looking at more opportunities to do those partnerships. We also want to look for opportunities to deliver complete streets. Our Great Streets program and our Great Streets 2 programs are both examples of that, but looking at opportunities to stack up the kinds of improvements, paving projects and bridge projects and culvert projects and sidewalk infill projects and crosswalk improvement projects, for example, instead of single function projects. And then we also, another value is exploring how to more effectively manage freight routes to ensure safety for all modes. This has been an ongoing conversation with our freight partners on a lot of our routes where we are trying to safely ensure that folks can safely cross our highways and on foot as well as and ride on our highways on bicycles and also accommodate freight vehicles and how do we go about designing for that and prioritizing places where all of those modes can travel.
The next few we have really relate to data information research. So I think Commissioner Baker, building off of some of your earlier points, kind of asking questions. Well, we've made some investments in some key areas and locations across the state. Are we seeing the results of those? What are those? And I think research is a key part of that, before and after kind of analysis and continual improvement. I would say that we have opportunity to do more of those than probably we're doing today. But some of the things that we have been doing with the research side of things are really trying to look at different improvements to see measurably how can that result in changes. So for example, we have an ongoing research project where we have a Ballard within a roadway that's saying, hey, pedestrian crossing here. We have actually found that that's reducing crashes 20 to 30% in those crossings. And so that research can be super impactful to make sure that we're focusing in on the right things and that we're continually learning. So we're obviously pulling in information from other states, talking with partners across the nation, looking at the latest research, but also conducting our own because sometimes we have unique land uses, conditions in Oregon, and we really need to see how well they work here to try to make them effective. The next piece then is something you've seen in the strategic action plan, that's just data. So data is all about the right information to the right person at the right time. So we're getting more of the right information. We're starting to, and I think part of this conversation is how are we using that in decision making? And then third, at the right time, because that's critical with safety. We cannot wait to get that information. We need to have it as soon as possible and be responsive to save lives. And so that's something we're working on. And as a proposed value here is just making sure that timeliness is key.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. My name is Amy Joyce. I'm the DMV administrator at the Oregon Department of Transportation. And in that role, as part of DMV, we have the Transportation Safety Office, which is the behavioral side of safety. So the focus so far has largely been on infrastructure and work there, which is critically important because people do make mistakes. But the Transportation Safety Office, trying to reduce the amount of mistakes people make, some of those bad decisions, really, speaking to this already, Commissioner Baker talking about, and Commissioner Byer, speed, impairment, distraction, right? All things where people are making bad decisions and causing crashes, fatal and serious injury. And so some of our values there, I think we're on the next slide. Yes. Yeah, thanks. All right. So policy and statutory changes in all three of those areas, right? Expanding speed enforcement, addressing distracted driving, and addressing DUI or driving under the influence of intoxicants. Some of the comments made earlier, right? Partnering with other agencies. So speaking right to the strategic action plan element of not only our own actions, but partnering, right, with others. So if we think about OSP, we do grants to OSP to do enforcement projects to help them with their equipment, that sort of thing. OLCC has a seat adjacent, I guess, on the governor's advisory on DUI, and come to the table with ideas on how we can deal with folks who are using legal substances, alcohol and cannabis, but do so without then deciding to pick up the keys and drive. And OHA, of course, right? OHA has their the data piece that they bring in for their own data dashboard on fatals and serious injuries. Their involvement with EMS, emergency medical services, and TSO also has a program in that area as well. But if we look at pushing forward with legislation to increase and really expand automated enforcement for speed and red light running. Just to Commissioner Byer's point, right, there isn't enough law enforcement, and there's never going to be enough law enforcement to be behind every car, so we all sort of stand up straight or sit up straighter and do better behind the wheel. Distracted, of course, terribly underreported because most of the time we don't know for sure, but when we see somebody drive off the road or cross into traffic, there's an assumption there that there's some form of distraction. And Oregon thankfully does have one of the strongest laws in the country, but we can be doing more. And then on that DUI piece, again, I think Commissioner Smith asked about, are we seeing increases in particular areas? So while DUI remains a high cause of crashes and fatal and serious crashes, polysubstance use. So we used to talk about drunk driving. Now we really have to be talking about drug driving and polysubstance use driving. And what can we be doing in partnership with OLCC, with cannabis dispensaries, with bars and restaurants and liquor stores, really to get people to, if you're going to do that thing, it's legal, go for it, just don't pick up the keys and drive. So the things we can be doing there. And then two, just on the behavioral side, some of the questions about, what can we really be doing? Are we staying in our lane? But we do tremendous things with teen driver education, one of the best programs really in the country to educate kids. We just don't have enough funds to fund more of those classes. And then a great project that we have that we're going to be beginning at the beginning of the fiscal year with a nonprofit in the Bend area that is getting into schools and educating middle and high schoolers about cannabis use and how it is impairing when you drive. So trying to reach younger kids. So a lot of great programs going on the behavioral side and partnering with a lot of other folks.
So I'm going to pause for just a second. Any questions for Amy? Great.
Right, so we're at the last two in this discussion. Focus on values around funding, seeking long-term funding for that incorporates resources for maintenance and operations of new safety features. We've certainly seen an increase in application of safety features such as the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, our RFBs, illumination, pedestrian, especially pedestrian level illumination, bike lane, separated bike lanes and buffered bike lanes. But we don't have the resources to maintain all of those new resources. And one of the things that we continue to encounter is that our RFBs, our rapid flashing beacons, often are hit by vehicles, and we need to get folks on the ground to repair them and replace them. And we don't have the funds and maintenance operations to do that, and that's been a challenge. So as we've been developing as we developed our funding needs number for our upcoming the upcoming session, we built that into it, and we want to always be thinking about as we develop new programs or we expand programs that we already have, and that we're thinking through life cycle costs and what it will take to not only build, make that capital investment, but preserve it in the long term. And then finally, we want to advance safety forward improvements, funding for safety forward improvements in the 2025 session. And so while we're having robust conversations about maintenance and operations and preservation of the system, we also were talking about safety being integral to all of that, and funding for expanded funding for safety improvements being part of that conversation. And ensuring that everybody can talk to and appreciate how those investments in maintenance and operations are also investments in the safety of the system.
So we have a question here, Commissioner.
Oh, just a comment. I'm fond of the beacons, but I was surprised in the last two legislative tour things, in every city that we hit in the county, they're all talking about, they keep getting hit. And for the life of me, I can't figure out how the heck you get off the road to hit one of those things.
Well, and
some of them were there in parking lots. But.
Well, and in some cases, we have rapid flashing beacons that are also on median islands. And those that are in median, on median islands are particularly prone to getting hit because they're in the median. But yes, it is definitely
maybe need to put some of those railings like we have in front of our bridge abutments in there.
And in some cases, the fact that they're getting hit means they're probably doing their job.
Yes.
I know that that's ironic, but I think a lot of times, and we don't have the data because we don't see every one of them, right? But a lot of times what we anticipate, though, is the potential for somebody to be distracted. They see the flashing light, they see the person in the crosswalk, and they swerve. And then they end up hitting those things instead of the pedestrian, which is a win, but it ends up being a cost.
Just because we're here, I have a question. The difference between the flashing yellow and the flashing reds, in my community, they're both. And the ones that seem to work the best are the flashing reds, although I've seen idiots recently who think that once the car ahead of them goes, they can go without stopping at all. But.
And there's been some interesting conversations recently about the use of the flashing yellows versus the flashing reds in different applications. And there are definitely some recommendations at a federal level about when to apply the flashing red versus the flashing yellow. The flashing red functions as a stop, whereas the flashing yellow is a warning. And there's definitely, I think, some confusion around that. I think there's some opportunity for education about how do you as a driver, how do you behave in different circumstances, and also as a pedestrian, how to expect drivers to behave when they see a flashing yellow RB versus the flashing red hawk intersection. So it's a great question.
I know that for myself, I've got one that I encounter on my morning walks all the time. There's no way I would step out in front of the road until the car stopped in both directions. And a lot of times with the flashing yellow, they don't stop. But the reds, I've observed those in two places. People seem to understand, oh, red means I'm supposed to stop.
Yellow is caution.
So I think at this point, we'd like to, we want to stop, pause and give the commission the opportunity to comment and share and ask questions and reflect on what we put in front of you, and where you'd like us to go, from here.
All right. Commissioners, anybody want to start out?
I'll try. I think the way that you've laid this out, your priorities make a lot of sense. I would reiterate, from my mind, I think we need to, and maybe you have this, a list of the safety areas and some kind of idea of what the cost is so that we can make some conscious decisions about that. I think there's a big difference between the rural and the urban. Tova kind of got at that a bit. I'm not really sure how to do that. We get our most criticism, it seems, in the larger urban areas. And the answer to that is largely, I believe, municipal. I mean, they have primary responsibility around that. A lot of it is enforcement, which they're mostly in charge of, we're not, and there's very little impact we can make on that. The rural areas is just more about, I think you've got it there. The rumble strips are are good at keeping people from running off the road, or at least getting a good signal before they hit the bank or the tree. So and that, I would assume that's a lower, not cheap, but that's a lower cost investment to look at some of that, although I wonder about what does that do to the maintenance of the road, the life cycle of the road. So that's a question there. The education, Amy's comments about that, I think that is a very good program. And I'm not sure how much more you can do on that. I wasn't aware we were funding the OSP, the pilots where they go in and do a fine thing. I think those work. So I think you're on the right track, and certainly paying more attention, being data-driven makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, that makes sense, and in fact, that's my prioritization is let's look at those priorities and figure out, where are we having the most trouble? Where are the most people getting seriously injured or killed? That's probably where we ought to put our energies, regardless of where those are. If that's happening, I suspect if you do that, that probably gets at the low-income communities issue.
In some areas.
There's a reason why that's happening there. It's not because of who they are or what their income is. It's because we're not making the investments in those communities. That's kind of rambling.
Okay, so Mr. Baker, do you have any comments or you want to wait?
Yeah, I'll make a couple. One, Amy, I appreciate your comments, and I think if we had a state with 100% responsible people, that what a difference it would make. But we're always going to have irresponsible people, and we can call them mistakes, or I've got other terms. I mean, if you're a drunk driver, in my view, that's not a mistake. That's an intent criminal activity. And for those 3 bullets there that talk about policy, I think it would be, really nice in terms of having an element of accountability. And if we were known as a state that had the highest accountability for, these intentional acts, speeding, distracted driving, drunk driving, drug driving, I think it would be helpful, but it's not going to be the answer, because, we're not going to, but maybe it would be some of the answer. Maybe if we had policy where we really toughened it up and made the consequences, it would steer some people in a different direction. But I think too, Commissioner Byers' comments about, things that we know, where, they're tested and they're true and they're in our control, are places that, we can really, really think about, investing there.
Hey, thank you. Commissioner Smith?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, how about Commissioner Cap?
I was actually taking notes and trying to plot out potential interventions on a graph where we're looking at the x-axis is how much does it cost? Be realistic. Rumble strips and barriers for bikes are relatively inexpensive compared to massive public service campaigns and unfortunately things that we don't have the authority to do, like enforce drunk driving and speeding rules. And then how effective is it? And I think we have to think about that from a really utilitarian perspective. So how many lives are we saving? Not, how impactful is this intervention based on the overall potential impact? So let's say rumble strip stops 10% of trucks driving into the other lane, but all of those are fatal, and we're saving X lives instead of a campaign that is 100% effective, but it only impacts 1 or 2 fatalities a year. And I'm sorry to reduce it to numbers, but when we're thinking about really triaging our limited funds, I think we kind of have to. And I'd love to see exactly in line with what Vice Chair Byer was saying, the data behind that so we can make really informed decisions and try to get the most return on our investment here.
Right. So maybe it's all right. Just long reach there. So I'm taking the privilege of going last so I can jump on everybody's comments, but I think that the rapid improvements is critical. I mean, I think that piece of policy, when something happens, we need to respond, and we need to respond as quickly as possible using the data that's available. Doesn't matter if it's urban or rural, it has to happen. And so for me, these are all good points. There isn't one here that I think isn't a good point. I think that a lot of times in communities, you will see that it's a mix of all of these things. So it doesn't matter if it's a low-income community, disparity in that community as far as who lives there. It's what is happening on the ground. Is it the movement of traffic and there isn't sidewalks? Today I cringed when we were up on the bridge and I was watching 2 people on electric bicycles and I'm like, are you out of your mind? First of all, you have electric bicycle, get in the lane of traffic instead of trying to go on that little cement thing. And she hit the wall and almost fell off. Yeah. And I thought, this is really dangerous. And I wanted to yell at her, but I was behaving myself. But again, it gets back to really educating people is important, but it's a cost. It costs a lot to educate people. So whatever we're doing, whatever we can do to match funds or to make that happen is important, I think, in our communities. The statutory piece of it, we have got to get tough in Oregon. Although, I'm going to say this, I can't tell you how many people I've heard about that have DUIs that are not supposed to be driving, are driving. They don't have a license. It's been suspended and they're still out there doing it. And, until we get tough on them, and it really costs them, I don't know that we can move the needle. And again, I think that there is statutory pieces that we can help push forward to try to improve that with the legislature. And I think it has to happen because we're seeing the end results of this. I have seen people smoking cannabis driving and you cringe and I call it in, but it happens. So again, a lot of this stuff we can't really control, but it does impact what we do. So for me, I think the priority really is the response, where we're seeing the crashes no matter what community it's in, that we're responding to it as rapidly as possible and trying to put a resource there to fix it. The one question I had, and this doesn't have to do with policy, but when we have these crashes and somebody takes out a barrier, when they take out the cable barrier, when they take out bridges, when they take out all these different things and the insurance money is collected on that, where does it go back to?
So Madam Chair, it doesn't always come back to us. And that's, each case is a little bit different, but we strive to get as much return back as possible so that we can repair those.
Because I keep thinking about this, the fires are an example. All of these different things that keep happening to ODOT. And we're waiting on people to pay back the response to a slide, the response to a fire, whatever it is. If it's FEMA, et cetera. And I always wonder, does it go back into the general fund and we never see it again? And yet we have put out money out of our budget to respond to all these things. And it's starting to bother me a little bit because I think that is some of the problems that we're having being able to maintain our budget.
Yeah, and I would say that wherever possible, we are chasing that down so that we can provide that insurance relief to offset some of our costs. I would say it doesn't cover all of the costs,
Right.
hardly ever. And there are circumstances where litigation and other things take a long time, and so it doesn't come back to us in the same way. I would also say, just to the earlier comments, I believe our role and our job is to create an opportunity for everybody to be successful. It's a little bit of the adage, my kids are all older now and hopefully they don't need this anymore, but there was a time when I needed to remind them that even when nobody's looking, right and wrong still matter. And there's a little bit of that in the system design that I believe is our job, right? We need to be able to design a system that people can operate safely within, even when nobody's looking. And that's our goal, but that will always be financially constrained. And so I think that's the push-pull and the values conversation that you hear from the team. We are always going to be constrained in that environment, but we really do want to design a system that captures those things even when people are making mistakes to the extent that we can.
Okay, yes.
Super helpful feedback today, and we've been all up here taking a lot of notes. One thing I just wanted to note, I'll probably say this because I'm often up here for data, and data's numbers, right? But as we talk about safety, those numbers are lives, and we look at it as lives. And so when we, hearing the comments today and from Commissioner Chapman, lowest cost, biggest impact, that is huge for what we look at, and it's because our goal is saving lives. That if the traffic incidents affect people, it affects them and their families for the rest of their lives. And so that human component, I think, is core to all of these conversations, and what we're talking about here aren't just programs, aren't just numbers. These are about people and saving lives.
Thanks, Samantha. I think we have just a couple more minutes, and what we wanted to do is follow up. And I think the last seed question was, how do you want us to come back to you and share progress that we're making or continue this conversation? What do you want to hear more about? And I guess I would say with what frequency would you like to hear about it? So that we can continue this conversation and also advance on some of the things that you've highlighted.
So one of the things I think I heard from the commission was we had those 4 projects that we tried to move the needle on and make a difference. And I think that it's a little early because the projects have just been completed. But I think we would like to hear back maybe 6 months from now. Did it move the needle? Has there been no, fatalities or no accidents in that corridor? Did the improvements that were made make a difference? Or any other project that ODOT has moved forward with over the last, let's say, 2 years to improve pedestrian access, bicycle, whatever it is. If there's a significant difference that we've made, I think that we need to hear about the good things that have happened. And then if there's also, we didn't move the needle, it didn't change anything, then we need to know that didn't work. What did we try and why didn't it work? What is the difference there? So at least from my perspective, that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to hear from the rest of the commissioners additional.
I would say any emerging trends that you're seeing in the data. For instance, I don't know what the impact of e-bikes and e-skateboards are going to do, but we've got a lot of bicycles and skateboards that are moving a lot faster than they've ever moved before, with a lot more confidence through traffic. So there may be some trends that maybe we can get out ahead of them a little bit in terms of, design, policy, all of those kinds of things. So if you're seeing a trend in the data, raise it fast.
Okay. Thank you, Commission, for your time and for this discussion. It's been really helpful, and we will reflect on all of the feedback, put together a plan to come back and share these things and I think work towards what we can do with the rapid program and prioritize for our project list. Those were both things that I think we've highlighted, as well as partnership opportunities, policy, so enforcement. So thank you again, appreciate it, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
And before you leave, I just, I threw out the idea of 6 months, but I'm thinking as we're moving forward towards this transportation package, if there's something that is glaring that works or isn't working, we need to maybe think about that so that we can bring it forward in part of the conversation that we're having.
And I heard a specific request to bring that forward as it relates to the safety elements, border-wide, those things, and that will be much simpler.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think, should we take just a 5-minute break real quick and let people use the restroom or get a drink of water if they need to, and then we'll be right back. Thank you.
It's really good.
Yeah, Liz. So thank you for the little break. And we are going to actually talk about item number C. It's a discussion. So we get to discuss with you. But I want to welcome Paul Mather and Paula Hammond to come in and talk to us about our strategic review, the findings and the recommendations to ODOT. So I will turn it over to you. Welcome. Or do you want to speak, Director? No. We won't allow that.
That's probably advised.
No, but let's give you the,
Change review.
Chairman, members of the commission, again, for the record, Chris Strickler, Director of ODOT. I want to start with a little bit of a background of where we have been. So I would say over the last 6 to 12 months, at various times, there's been things that have popped up that have either felt somewhat urgent or somewhat new, with not a lot of advanced warning, or at least not enough of advanced warning. In addition to that, we've also been working towards, as you well know, a conversation around transportation funding in the 25 session. We know at ODOT that we have to maintain and build trust, that we are spending money wisely, and that we are investing in the right locations in order for the legislature to have that confidence in us with the work that we need to do. So part of this is in response to both of those things. As you might recall in the March meeting, I mentioned to you that in response to some capital program development elements that we wanted to take a look at, some budgeting and revenue elements in our state and federal funding, and then also our overall program management of some of our larger programs. And you at times over the last year have asked really pointed questions about those things and said, how are we positioned in order to succeed in those areas? And what kind of evaluations have we conducted in order to help us advance that work, especially in those areas where we either didn't have kind of the background that it was necessary in order to build into those programs, or frankly, things had changed in our delivery of our program and are we adapting along with that? So I asked a team of experts to come in, led by Paula Hammond, to review those 3 priority areas, but then also to open up the bandwidth and the aperture. And the reason I say that is because I have a high level of trust in Paula and the team that she has pulled together, because they bring collectively well over 150 years experience. They're all only 22 years old, by the way. But they bring well over 150 years experience in leading big program at DOTs and elsewhere. The skill set is nothing short of amazing. The review we asked for was not an audit. It was give us a strategic review of not just those elements that I described, but anything else that you might see that can help us in the successful delivery of our program, really centered on how do we demonstrate that we've got the right processes in place and the work in the form that it should be, but then also to build that confidence and momentum that we're willing to look within ourselves, be vulnerable and ask the questions, and have outside experts come in and give us that evaluation. So there was no real defined scope beyond that for Paula's work. And so I wanted to provide that introduction and just say thank you to Ms. Hammond and the team. It really is significant value. And like I said, I had asked for that review, and it was a significant value to me, but I also think the other members of our team received a ton of value in the interviews and in the findings and in the work associated with that. This is all about accountability. This is all about follow through on the things that are important for our agency to be looking at. And so the goal for today is to provide you the opportunity to hear directly from the one that led that effort. In addition to that, you'll see a friendly face and another friendly face, I should say, because Paul is a very friendly face. But you'll see Paul Mayer, who was the first implementation element that came out of the review. And that is the review recommended that we assign and I assign an implementation champion, somebody that can really manage the effort. It's going to take work from the entire agency, but somebody to really project manage this work and keep people moving forward to produce the results associated with the review. First call was to Paul. Paul said yes, but he still might be wondering why. but he is doing a great job in helping to pull that information together. So you have in front of you unfettered access to the one that led the review and the one that's managing the response to the review. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Hannah.
Great. Hello, Chair Brown and members of the commission. I'm Paula Hammond. I currently work at WSP Consulting. I've been here for 11 or so years, but my foundation in transportation public service was at Washington State DOT, where I spent 34 years. I should also disclose Chair Smith, or Commissioner Smith, who is chairing the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee. Hello, I've been on that committee since it was first formed and really appreciate and enjoy being a part of how ODOT's progress has come since the 2017 package. So when Chris called me and said, here's what I'm thinking would be really helpful for us as an agency. Can you hear me okay? I have a booming voice anyway. And we talked about the kind of review and the kind of people that could be helpful in a review of ODOT as such. And my colleagues that I teach AASHTO leadership training with and who were CEOs at other state DOTs first came to mind. Not only for the diversity of the kinds of state DOTs that they ran and managed, but for the kind of work that we've all been through. This Oregon DOT is not unique in that things happen, that you run short of funds, that you're trying to figure out your strategic direction. While we're all different in our own states and we have different kinds of environmental responses that we need to do, many of us have been through the kinds of things that were being presented by Chris and his team as challenges. So our team, Dr. Sean Wilson, who had just retired from Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development, Susan Martinovich, retired from the Nevada DOT after a career there, Kirk Steidel, Michigan DOT director for many years, and then we brought in Linnea Laird, who was WashDOT's chief engineer and Assistant Secretary for Engineering and Regional Operations. She managed all of the mega program delivery for WashDOT during my tenure. And Valentina Domper-Medici, who was the person that kept us moving and organized through our strategic review. So that was our team. And this kind of work is really a labor of love for us. I should also disclose that my first engineering job was as an intern for Oregon DOT in Klamath Falls. So I always get in the ODOT pictures whenever we're at a conference and folks are there, because that's what started my career. We reviewed, looked at the kind of issues that Chris asked us to review, and very quickly realized that the best way to go about this work was to interview the staff that are responsible for delivering the programs, but to poke and prod through those interviews and really understand how they did their work and the kinds of processes they used, where they've been, where they're trying to get to with the kinds of outcomes they have, and are they and also experiencing challenges in getting that done. Very quickly, we saw some of the struggles, like I said, that we had had, and we also, in our work today as consultants, have an opportunity to work with state DOTs around the country. So we observe who's doing things well, and we understand how legislative bodies and local agency elected officials and urban areas and rural areas interact with each other in a way that provide challenges that might be unique to Oregon, but we've seen similar kinds of issues. And we're also recognizing that you're struggling with revenues, as many states are. And with a focus on the lack of preservation and maintenance funding in Oregon, by the way, Washington's struggling with that same thing right now, we understand that, as Chris said, for an agency to be seen as credible and trusted in the delivery of any new revenue package, you really have to demonstrate that you have your house in order. And so congratulations for taking on this effort. And the spirit that the staff and team members that we interviewed was all around the notion of
wanting to do better. Please help us think about how to do these things better. So it was really, it was a great exercise for us as well. We interviewed Chair Brown. You might recall I interviewed you by phone, Governor's Policy Advisor as well. We didn't reach out beyond ODOT. We were trying to understand the practices. We didn't talk to legislators. We were trying to understand the mechanics of how ODOT does their work and where they might have some challenges or struggles. What we learned, we made observations. We fell short of calling them findings because it was really a 1-2 month exercise. But we wanted to make sure that we looked at how projects flow from beginning all the way through delivery, and how other state DOTs who are recognized as being excellent in their field and having great results in delivery of programs and projects are implementing things like performance management, very aligned communication and project controls, reporting, planning for projects, the lead time it takes to identify what your program will look like. Those kinds of things crept up to us as things that perhaps we needed to delve into more, and we're going to hear more about that in a minute. But we recognize that there's many good things. This is, uh-oh, am I going the wrong way? There, what's working well? You never want to start telling people where they can improve without recognizing all the good things that are going on. Many of us, and I spend a lot of time on Oregon's highways, recognize Oregon's highways look pretty good. There's some great highways, great transportation systems. I appreciated hearing this previous session on safety. All states are struggling with safety. I really like the way you're aligning your safety values and thinking with your strategic action plan and your Oregon transportation plan. That's how those things come together to implement something you can measure towards results. So I think the kinds of practices ODOT has is really very good. The staff, every person we interviewed was anxious to hear, to tell us what they did. First of all, very proud of the work they do, but also anxious to hear what we thought about why things weren't as smooth as they thought they should be, or who has better tools than we do, and what might be missing in order to truly be that high-performing agency that they seek. We recognize the relationships with the local agencies and the executive branch partners, the governor's office, the commission. You support and work very closely with ODOT, and it's recognized that that's helping make ODOT's work better. And there's a lot of engagement in the Portland metro area with stakeholders, invitations for those local agencies and local elected leaders to participate. And while sometimes that can be chaotic, it's also recognized as great partnerships for getting things done in this metro area in a multimodal kind of a transportation system way. And the department has always valued continuous improvement, and you have many great practices and skills that are seen every day. I signed up one a couple of years ago for every, I think I'm on every press release, and I hear about every road that's about to be closed or project work. And it's really interesting to see the robust nature of the communications that this agency has externally. I would say it's stronger than most other states. And so I recognize that these are some of the great things that are going on. What we recognize too were then opportunities for improvement. When there's smoke, when things aren't working well, what's causing it? Is there a failure of communication? Is there some alignment within the different divisions that perhaps isn't coming together? And that's really what we focused on, because we saw some of those symptoms, which is why we recommend the kinds of actions that we did. We also recognize that ODOT, probably more so than many agencies, has not been able to keep up with their administrative and overhead investments of resources as well as tools that many states have in order to do good performance management, have good project controls and reporting, good programs start up and follow through. If you don't put the resources on those positions, and we're all in a creation moment right now in transportation, the NEVI program, every state's trying to figure out how to electrify their system. And you have the public transportation, the STIP program, creating things from whole cloth, take brain power, resources, and strategy that ODOT has not had the opportunity as much to keep up with in the overhead. And I know the legislature controls some of the FTEs and how that works, but in order to do good work, you have to have good people. You have to train them. You have to give them the responsibility, and you have to engage them in the success of the agency. And I think that's what we were, as a theme, we're really trying to acknowledge, that having the agency aligned around performance management, which is measure the work we do and report and have strong controls around the money we spend so that we can say, here's where the money's going, and here's how we're managing that. And when things aren't going well, the leadership team then can recognize early, because of the reporting and the performance monitoring, where they may need to step in and help remove barriers. And so we encouraged more of that to happen, more cross-functional teams, and then to really look at the program planning exercises agency does. It's been different than what I see a lot of state DOTs do. Many state DOTs start building a program plan for over a 5 to 10 year time frame. At WashDOT, we had a 10-year program plan. Didn't mean we got to fund every project in that program, but we had a rolling program that when the revenue was made available, we were able to say, here's the bundle of preservation and safety projects we need, here's the new mobility enhancements or the modernization of the system kinds of projects, and you had those started, you knew when they were, where they were in the pipeline and development, and it was the ability to look forward in a way with your project investments that didn't constrain you just to what the federal STIP has you do.
Sure, we have a question from Commissioner Byer.
Paula, can you expand on that a little bit? Are we talking about technological gaps or approach gaps or staffing gaps?
Between ODOT and on
Well,
the programming?
I'm looking at your first two, the alignment and performance and the planning
Okay,
that
I'll
you
be
talked about.
specific about these three, because I think most everything we recommended, and then a few sidebar that's in the report, aligned or organized under these three bullets. So agency alignment is mostly about great internal communication from the top of the agency to the line staff. Everyone knows where the agency is going, what our values are. Hey, here's what our strategic action plan says, and here's how we're going to implement it. And it also includes communication up and listening, so it's this constant engagement within the agency so that folks know and feel that they're a part of what the agency is focusing on and what their values are. In order to do that, expectations have to be very clear, all the way from Chris down through his deputies and down to the managers of each of the divisions and offices, so that everybody can acknowledge that they know this is the priority and here's the path we're on. We saw some gaps in that, not terrible, but it's a recognition that it has to be constant, and it has to be a value and a commitment that alignment within the agency is one of the most important things to success. And so that was what we meant by that. The culture of performance management just means that you identify what it is you're going to do, and then you measure whether you did it. And for our state and Washington and many of the other states that our team works in, there was an expectation either by their governor or their legislature or a commission that reporting comes back, and in those programs, the agencies say, here's where we are, here's where we had trouble, but here's what our success looks like. And if we did something that didn't work out, it's so important for the agency always to acknowledge that, because that's what makes you more believable. Hey, we struggled on this thing. Program planning and delivery and transportation revenue projections are very technical, but most states have invested in some kinds of systems, whether it's an off-the-shelf Oracle type system or they've modified their own for good project control, reporting, revenue projection, and those kinds of tools help them be more accurate and more consistent from year to year. One of the things that I think it's important to note is that when you're measuring, at least what we saw with our states and other good states that were having great delivery success with major projects, is that it has to have a laser focus of where you are in the project and not find out 6 months later that something's not going well and you've lost 6 months of time. So it's a culture of constant project controls and reporting and performance management. But it also helps you manage the agency so that you all feel that you're in tune with where you are and where your success and where your risks are. Risks, identifying those risks early and then managing them is just critical to any major project and program delivery. State DOT revenue sources, as Travis can tell you, are so complex, and every state's a little different, whether you get, gas tax in a certain way or indexing or federal money and grant programs, and it's a constant juggle of trying to be on top of where that money's coming from, and notwithstanding with a federal act that comes around every 5 years, they're trying to predict or project what they might get for formula funds and other kinds of federal money. So it's not easy, it's complex. And I just encourage that the agency have the ability to have the right tools, whatever they've identified they need to help manage and keep those transportation funds identified and constantly updated. The third bullet is the recognition of a very strong strategic action plan that the agency has developed, and it's very ambitious, and it looks to the future, which I think is great. It's describing the future that you want in Oregon in transportation and how Oregon's investments and the work ODOT does can contribute to that. The problem is that we recognize right now, you're struggling with your maintenance and preservation dollars. So you're here and you have a plan that is ambitiously driving you to here. And what we recognized within some of our interviews is the staff is looking for that transition or roadmap of how to get from here to there. From this state where we don't have enough money to plow the roads in the winter, how do we then get to the point where we know what steps we need to take to get to the future we've described in our strategic action plan. And it might be mostly a communication, but it's a part of a strategic action or strategy that the agency can adopt and know about so that they'll feel that they're contributing and making progress towards the future state, the strategic action plan. Is this my last? Happy to answer questions. Oops, what did I do? I went all the way to the end. There you go. Man, I have a heavy finger here. Here, I'll give it back to you. Paul.
Responsive to me. Yeah. So,
Is that your first slide?
yeah, we'll just start. Paul Mather, implementation champion, I believe is my title, but it's good to be back in front of you. Of all the things I thought I'd do with retirement, being back in front of you wasn't one of them. Chris called and here I am. As Chris said, my role here is to be a project manager and really help the organization follow through and get the work that Paula and her team put together across the finish line and get implemented. Going forward. As I left the organization, we were implementing House Bill 2017. We had the McKinsey report. As I come back, a lot of that stuff the organization's still working on. They've made progress, but Paula found in her report there's still more work to be done in many of those same areas. The work that we've got in front of us now, Chris's expectations are that we get the work completed or substantially completed by the end of the calendar year. So heading into session, we could say we either complete the item or we're well into implementation. Some of the work items will take longer than that, sometime into next year, but those will be implementation steps, not formative steps in implementing the work item. As we took on the work, as you see in the report, Paula's team organized it kind of on a timeline, the things you got to start with, and then here's some kind of medium priorities and then a little longer term priorities. We took those kind of timeline priorities and kept those, but we really organized them around similar to what Paula was describing, kind of around the processes, the people, the structure of the organization. And the first one, the first item, and I'll go through each one. The first one is really focused on the project controls and the kind of the processes of the organization. And in those, we've got the things that Paul was just talking about, the budgetary capital programming. We're going to talk about the 5 to 10 year rolling program, those project controls. As we move into kind of the discussion period, I want to spend most of our time talking about these because I think we put these first because I believe the commission and many, as they look at this work, this is where your interests are going to lie in these first several. The next group are similar kind of controls pieces, but they're more internal control pieces of the organization. And those have to do, again, as Paul was talking about, is how the organization communicates, how it makes its decisions, how things happen kind of internally in the organization and get things done. The last piece is focus on the people side of things, and making sure we've got not only accountabilities on the project side, but we have accountabilities on the personnel side. We have training and development. We're filling key positions, and we're supporting our advisory committees in the right way, that they have the right expectations and support from the organization. So those are the kind of the 3 broad categories that we have. I thought we'd pause here before we got into discussion and just get any more questions that you may have. Maybe just as important, is there anything that you expected to be in the report that wasn't in the report?
So, Paul, can you talk a little bit about the change from focusing on the STIP to a rolling plan?
If we could hold that question, I'm gonna call the team up that's gonna be working on that, and I think I want to spend some time specifically on that. So we will get to that. I think before we jump into some of those specific things, I just want to make sure that questions for Paula or I before we start bringing some of the team leads up to talk about the different work items and make sure there's any questions you have or that broader question I said of the things that you expected to be in a report that aren't.
And maybe I could say one more thing about as they come up. Our eyebrows raised when we learned that ODOT mostly programs through the STIP, because the federal STIP is a financially constrained plan. And it has to be updated every, year, I don't know how often that gets, well, it gets updated when something changes, which is a constant churning update of the STIP. But because it's financially constrained, our practices and those that we had seen around the country that had really helped develop long-range implementation of projects are those that aren't financially constrained to the money you have in hand. Because many times, for us, we were making the case for why a Rose Quarter or IBR, those projects are outside of your capacity to fund today, but you're seeking grants, you're asking the legislature for more help, or you're finding other revenue sources. And to be able to lay that out in a way that demonstrates your strategy of investments, to us is a better way to plan for the future and then make the case for the investments that you do need. So, and so none of us had used the STIP for that kind of programming other than to implement that short time frame plan of projects that were funded and ready to go, into construction.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I mean, before this, I don't remember when the STIP was revised sometime in the 80s when they went to this constrained thing, but I've always thought that what was lost was a broader vision about what projects are out there that we want to do, but we can't fit into the current STIP.
Yes, and we all know the lead time it takes for those projects to get developed, and planned, developed,
Yeah,
pre-designed, et cetera. So you might want to have that on your
I like
map.
that.
Okay.
Good. So back to my question, questions for Paul or I, or things that you expected to be in there that weren't?
Sorry, I'm looking over here and I'm looking.
Oh, cool.
Okay, just on what, this seems to be focused mainly on capital projects. And I'm wondering how things like making improvements in like EV charging station rollouts, I guess that's capital. There's some things that seem to fit outside of that, they don't fit as nicely into.
To me, it's very clear on a project delivery, a capital project delivery, but all these kinds of things apply to a program as well. So EV charging is the one states around the country are struggling with because the infrastructure bill said, hey, we're going to give you money to implement charging stations. And we're going to give you formula funds if you do your plan. And so all the state DOTs were excited, but then US DOT said, but we haven't made up the rules yet. So there was this great expectation and time that was confusing for everyone. So it's not a great example. But internally, how the agency aligns about what their goals are, understands the expectations of who's going to do what, how we're going to report on where we're at, how we're going to stay together on what our challenges or risks are in this program are very much like a project, if you look at it that way. And I think that's where we were recognizing even those kinds of programs can be, you can use performance management and good agency communications and alignment around that to have success and measure your success. Because you always want to know how well you did by the time you're done so that you can implement lessons learned and other things.
Good, thank you.
The performance management culture, it's the key to the whole thing. And technology is easy, project management is easy, culture is really hard. And I think, just my experience on it is you have to have trust in order for it to work. Because we're going to be asking, there's a whole new set of expectations with regard to setting goals, meeting your goals, reporting on what's going well, reporting on what's not going so well. And if you don't have an organization with a culture of trust, it becomes really difficult because, the silos continue to control the information. So I'd be curious about, as you work through here, talking about the trust element, how we build it into the organization, both internally and externally. I think from an external perspective, as I've spent my last year listening to a whole lot of people, the organization is not particularly well trusted in many different places with many different constituencies. And so, part of what we need to do is become a trusted organization and a trusting organization. So I'd love to hear more as we work our way through the afternoon on that subject.
It's interesting because I asked Chris about the term, and it was more around the tolling program when I read the articles, and why does this word trust keep coming up? And I had the opportunity separately to interview some of the elected officials around that program before while it was still in development. And it wasn't a notion of we think Chris is a liar as much as there was an attitude of we don't know where this is headed because we feel like we don't know what we don't know, and so we're not very trusting. But most people didn't. I said, do you not trust the agency? And by and large, most people said, oh yeah, we trust them. But I think culture is about relationships, and it's about relationships inside the agency when people know their role, they understand their role, and they step up and have ownership of the program, the project, the direction that the director is setting for the agency and the leadership team. they have to be tight as a team, measured towards the success of the agency, not just an individual office or a division. And it's the essence of every agency's or even business success. I agree. How you build it, one conversation at a time. And a lot of it, I think, it helps when you're listening to people as much as you're directing. You know, you can't just have the leadership talking out. You have to be taking and engaging with employees and partners and others.
Yeah, and my sense too, having led some big culture change projects, and oftentimes having a difficult situation that an organization is facing really helps accelerate that. Like our budget problems could really help accelerate that, honestly. Like COVID helped many organizations go through cultural changes that were really important, and supply chain shortages and all of those kinds of things. But it takes some time. So as we set deadlines and we think about, where we put our check boxes in, I think we begin this journey, my sense, in 24, but we don't complete this journey. We don't come anywhere close to it in 24. Is that your sense, Paul?
Yep. Definitely. I think we'll have a good roadmap and a good direction of where we're headed. But it's going to take several of these items to ingrain in the culture that we're talking about. It's going to take many months to years after that to get that ingrained in the organization. But we're going to set that direction by the end of the year.
So looking at the discussion questions, I guess, and we have a couple more commissioners over here. So I keep forgetting, I keep to look over there, they're over there. Was there anything not included in the review that the commission felt they would have liked further investigation on? A good indicator, maybe. Oh, Sharon, sorry,
Thank you.
your hand doesn't show up. It goes under a thing when you did that, so sorry.
God, I'll do this next time.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Helps me.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Paula and her team, and I have the very great privilege of working with Paula on the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee. And I cannot think of a better person to lead this effort because she is just so insightful and really always has value added to any conversation that we have at the committee. So thank you, Paula. I really appreciate your continuation on our committee. It makes it a better committee going forward. I guess the one thing that I was wondering is, did you spend any time looking at all about how the commission interacts with the director and the agency? I'm just wondering, we're always looking to continually improve how we do things. And did you touch at all or think at all about how we might work better together and integrate better with the agency and the director?
We did not. I interviewed the chair and wanted to get her feeling and asked her to try and speak for all of the commissioners. We were limited in our time and ability to interview everyone, but got the sense that there is good communication between the commission and the agency. I don't know where you are. Oh, you're over here. And that things seem to be working well, but there was recognition that there was issues that the commission had that said, why is this happening? Or why did this happen? And so it is your job, your role as leaders of this organization as a commission is to continue to make sure the agency is performing in its best way. And it seems like you're asking the right questions. So this is good. I was really pleased when Chris told me that he had convinced Paul to come out of retirement and head up the implementation plan, because already I can see that things are happening, and the approach that you're taking and the people you're engaging throughout the agency with responsibilities of implementation, I think you're going to get a very good outcome. And as you monitor and watch and hear reports on it, I think you'll be pleased.
Great, thank you very much.
Hey, I don't. Commissioner Chapman, did you have anything you wanted to add or? Okay. All you-
Okay, so I think in our time remaining, I thought we'd jump back to some of the first ones that I thought you'd be most interested in. And call up the team leads we have on each of those. Travis is going to be leading the budgetary and capital programming process. And those will also be the rolling program. I thought we'd try to get to at least those couple and have them share with you the work that they're doing on those and kind of what to expect. And so Commissioner Byer, I thought we'd get into your question about, so what is this rolling program and what does that look like, and hear from those that are actually going to be implementing it. So Travis could come up and. No, they
Okay.
We can say in case there's questions. Yeah.
Attack me.
Oh, you're it. All right, good.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the commission. Again, Leah Horner, the Assistant Director for Operations at ODOT. And I think I have the opportunity to work on the majority of the items that are identified in Initiative 1. And just as a recap for everybody, within my portfolio in operations is delivery and operations, which is led by Macklin, is the policy data and analysis, which is led by Amanda Peets. It's the urban mobility office, which is led by Brendan Finn, and it's the public transportation division, which is led by Suzanne Carlson. So I just point that out because I think a lot of the areas that we're looking at within this initiative do fall under my portfolio as one of the largest within the agency. And we're leaning into a number of these initiatives and bullet points in a very holistic and comprehensive way. Just as a little bit of background, and this is a little bit of a divergent from the shift and the STIP, but I'll have the team come and talk about that in a minute. We are having work sessions to really figure out how do we start implementing some of these things across each of those 4 divisions. And knowing that there are a number of different touch points that need both action, that need delivery, that need initiative change, and that need better tracking and outcomes at the tail end of that. And it's not just looking like, yes, delivery and operations is the largest, but it's not just them. And it came up earlier because we're looking at it from both the capital project perspective, but also the program perspective. So how do we have something like a quarterly program review that is applicable to the regions, but could also be applicable to NEVI, could also be applicable to STIP. So we're rolling all those things together to try to figure out how are we actually consistent in how we're framing things, looking at things, and then reporting them out. So I will say that my team is kind of the active team on most of these bullets. We are working with Travis on the first, and his team on the first bullet. But we're collectively working on each of these pieces to then kind of roll into a larger systemic change that, as was identified, will take longer than a couple of months, but I think that we're really trying to get on the right trajectory from the beginning. I think specifically to the implementing the 5 to 10 year rolling program, I've got, so in our conversations yesterday, so it's Mac Lind, it's Tova Peltz, Amanda Peets, and we're also bringing in Suzanne Carlson as a piece of that team because she does have STIP impacts within the public transportation division. And so we're trying to kind of bring everybody around the table to make sure that we're all collectively moving in the same direction on this. Some of the initial steps that have been taken is looking, as Paula indicated, looking at some best practices in other states, right? Because we don't want to recreate the wheel, and we know that this has been done elsewhere. So what can we pick from some of the other states that have actually been successful at doing this differently than we do it right now? And so there's actually been a ton of research that's out there. We've got a really great spreadsheet that shows what other states are doing that we can point everybody to if anybody's interested in. But the other thing that we've identified through this is that this is one of the big areas when you look at all of the initiatives that we're looking at that actually needs a lot of external public engagement to make sure that people know the direction that we're headed and are not surprised by it and are coming alongside us. So this is one of the areas that I think we're both doing internal work to kind of figure out where we're going, but we know that we need to do a ton of external work to kind of figure out what that actually looks like. So again, I mentioned the team that's working on this, and they can give you a little bit more detail about how far we've gotten if the commission wants to go down that path.
Well, I'll look to the rest of the commissioners. What would you like to see?
I'm just wondering, do you have all the tools that you need to be able to do this? And what additional support do you need to pull this off? Because you've got a big one here.
Yeah, Commissioner Baker, I appreciate that a lot, and I think that, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but I think we're gonna figure that out as we go along, right? So I think, and I will say, and this is nothing against the work that we've done to this point, but like our QPR is an example, like it is a homegrown document that we've put together internally. Is that gonna sustain us through the long run? I don't know. And so that's something that as we start testing it, we will be able to figure out what additional resources we need. I am guessing, and I'm just gonna throw this out there and everybody can throw things at me, that we will need more additional IT resources to be able to better track and then hold people accountable for what it is that we're actually tracking.
Sharon, was that a flip of your hair? Okay. Was it?
It wasn't this.
Oh, okay. I just saw a hand movement out the corner of my eye. So, all right. So everybody's sitting here stunned.
I can take number one, yeah.
So now you're gonna mess it up? All right, go ahead, Travis.
Chair, Brad, members of the commission, for the record, Travis Brower, that's Assistant Director for Revenue and Finance. And I even tried to give you good news in
You did.
break so that I would be set up for success, and apparently that didn't work. So I am involved in the first bullet there, as Leah noted, which is around improving budgetary and capital programming processes. But I will say that this actually, the primary work product right now is in the hands of our audit staff. You'll recall in May, we brought to you an adjustment to the STIP that was necessitated by the way we had built the STIP and how that contributed to a significant budget error where we over budgeted, over programmed projects and over budgeted in a way that then made it so that we did not have sufficient resources to cover those projects. So we laid out at that time a whole series of steps that we were already taking, already had taken, and would be taking. Right now, what is going on is audit services is essentially reviewing that work, determining whether those are going to be sufficient in order to address the budgeting challenges we created. And then we'll be reviewing and providing accountability to make sure that we're actually taking those steps. So some of that will be implemented in the 25-27 budget that you will receive tomorrow and hopefully approve, where we have changed how we are budgeting those federal funds in a way that then reduces that, or what it should eliminate the over budgeting of federal funds. So we will be waiting eagerly for our partner's report, which will come to you later this year, and then be taking the appropriate steps that are recommended in that report.
Okay, so you just told me you did something, that you found out something good, and now you just threw something else at me. But let's go back to your good news. Okay? Go ahead and tell everybody the good
Yeah,
news.
Madam Chair, you asked before the break during the safety component of this discussion about what happens and whether we're able to collect when people damage ODOT property, taxpayer property. And the good news is that we do have a very successful program we call Claims Against Others, which essentially goes after those who have damaged state property. And the good news is we have significantly ramped up our average collections in recent year. I think it's more than doubled over the last decade to over $7.3 million per year on average over the last 3 years. So we are being very effective at bringing those resources back into the agency to ensure that we can repair those damaged to taxpayer resources and not have the taxpayers have to cover that cost.
Okay. That is good news. Now, I heard you say something, and I want to clarify. You said, I hope it's going to cover the cuts that we made, the decisions that we made in March to balance the STIP. You said, I hope it's going to cover, but we won't know. Is that what you said? Is that what I heard?
Chair Brown, that was not my intent to say
Okay,
that.
everybody else heard it too, and I was
No,
like,
we
okay.
are monitoring very closely
Okay.
the expenditures in the STIP, and you'll see that in the budget as well, that we have moved the needle in terms of the expenditures. We will not be going over in project delivery, and that has shored up the cash balance in the state highway fund. We monitor that on a monthly basis, and all trends are pointing in a better direction than they were when we brought that item to you in May, in part because of the actions you've taken, in part because of all the other things we are doing to shore up the state highway fund and ensure that we have the resources to pay our bills every day.
The reason I asked that, transit agencies are starting to realize that we're getting it. Oh, no, I'm gonna ignore you for a minute, Sharon. Let's say, the heat is on me right now because the transit agencies are realizing on the rebalancing of the STIP that they're losing their elderly and disabled transportation dollars. And so the heat is on, and I'm feeling it. I'm getting scorched pretty good. But go ahead, Commissioner Smith.
Oh, thank you. I just was wanting if we could hear just a high level overview of how you plan to go about transitioning to this 5 to 10 year rolling program planning. I mean, what's the nuts and bolts of what you plan, what you think you're going to be doing, how you're going to be doing it?
That's a great question. So I will say the first steps that we have engaged in through our plan, and I see some of the team coming up, is that they're, like I said, they're initially doing this review of other states, and that'll come forward to us for review. Oh my gosh. By September, and then we'll have a better sense of kind of the direction that we're headed in. But if you guys want to talk more about the nuts and bolts on that.
Yeah, good afternoon, Matt Glenn, Delivery and Operations Division Administrator. It's a great point. So Commissioner Smith, I think it's a little bit yet to be determined exactly what implementation will look like, but to Leah's point, early next year, we want to have that plan that we can put into motion. I think to Commissioner Baker, your question around, do we have the, I think that potentially will be shifting of internal resources around to make that happen. Potentially leveraging new resources to manage in a different way. The third bullet point up on the screen around centralized program management, I think that's what really I took away from the strategic review discussions we had with Paula and her team of how are we putting those centralized controls in place and how are we managing it with people that are not responsible for delivering the projects, but managing the portfolio delivery of our work. Similarly, I could see that same approach taken in terms of like a capital programming group that's managing that 5 to 10 year rolling program. So not from a STIP perspective like we have today with Travis and his team managing the finances, along with my team managing the delivery of the work, and Amanda's team managing the policy conversation in that matrix way. We're setting that stage and going through that rolling every year update. Commissioner Byer, to your question around safety earlier, around the list of safety needs and how we're prioritizing them, I see that fitting into this 5 to 10 year rolling program where we're not, to Paula's point, not allocating funds to the projects yet, but we're putting investments towards them to understand what are the solutions. I think to Commissioner Chapman's question, what's the ROI on those solutions that we're implementing? Are we getting the best impact, positive impact of funds? So there's a lot of moving parts to that, I think, and I think it's a legacy change for the department, and to Leah's point, our external partners that work with us on these projects. We're right in the middle of scoping projects right now for the 2730 STIP. So I think we're at a great moment to leverage that moment and combine the work we're doing today and then take it a little further. Also feeds into the work we've done on the transportation needs assessment going into the funding package to say what are our needs out into the future. We can envision a space in the not too far future where we have a list of bridge projects in a 10-year window that says here's how we would plan to invest on 10 years worth of bridge projects. Today it's more of a one-off question that we're asking ourselves. I want to thank the team that Paul pulled together because that was really the lightning moment for my team as we were in that interview of a lot of things clicking in terms of this is why we've struggled with fiscal constraint and STIP. this is why we've struggled when we do get those questions of how far out into the future are we looking, so.
Could I add, your comment about bridges was a perfect example. I was going to give you a pretty basic example, but you have programs within the agency, even in the asset management category, pavements, bridges, significant light standards, culverts. You have things that your assets that you're trying to maintain and keep open and in good condition. So your pavement, for example, your assessment every however many years you measure the pavement conditions, you know what pavements are good, fair, and some that are failing. You'll create a prioritization of when certain roads need to be paved or repaired or whatever, crack sealed, et cetera. And then you build that program out so you can see what your investments should be for a good asset management, good and fair pavements. And then you'll have to match it up with the money Travis says you have available for pavements. And that's when you start recognizing that we're trying to program 10 years worth of projects in this very specific category. And we have some trade-off decisions to make. It may be that the communities want mobility investments and modernization. There's got to be safety investments. You have to start laying out those needs in a way that you can then measure and determine where your trade-offs and how far you can make your money go. And when there's not enough, go get a federal grant to help fill this gap, but maybe we need new revenue, or maybe we need to start collecting revenue differently from users. I won't say the word, that's when you can really start having those conversations about what the true needs are. And I think that was bridges are a great example.
This is fun.
Yeah.
All the way down the end. For the record, Amanda Peets, Administrator for Policy Data and Analysis. So I think most of the points have been touched on really well. I'll just say, like, very tactically, Commissioner Smith, in terms of changes that we're seeing, the STIP is a document that goes to the federal government that describes how we spend their money. We have in Oregon historically used that as the tool to have our investment conversations. And this would separate that out to be, the STIP is our reporting tool to the federal government. We're going to have a unique conversation on investments. It allows us to be strategic. And to the points made here, I think it allows us to look at investments in a different way. So for example, when we've often come to the Transportation Commission, we say, how much do you want to put towards fixing the system, towards safety, some of those types of investments? I think this allows us to pull back a little bit and say, what are the right investments for communities, for corridors, more holistic, only somewhat agnostic potentially of the funding source and the type. It is, what are those strategic investments that we need to be making? How does that translate then into how we program specific projects and things? So I think not only to Mac's point in terms of resourcing for what does a group look like that deals with this, how do we assure accountability and tracking of these things, to the IT needs that Leah mentioned, but also even how we interact with the commission to a higher level strategic conversation that's longer term, that's checking in more frequently than just, oh my gosh, we have a project that we need to amend in the STIP and we're going to change scope, schedule, or budget. We're having the more holistic conversation on the what is it we're trying to achieve, how are we meeting some of those objectives, and how do we modify that approach moving forward.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
I like the approach that we're going here, but we're talking at a fairly high level, and I guess I have two thoughts about that. One is we've got this culture and system that we've developed of using the axe as an input basis bottom up. And this is likely to change that a lot. And I think we need to think about how we're going to manage that and how we're going to get that local input and put it in the system. That's one. The other one is just more internal. Again, this strikes me, and I can see it, understand it as a management level kind of system. But at some point, I don't see the direct ties down to the, you got a project you need to deliver and you're going to deliver it through a regional manager and a district manager, that piece. I'm not asking for an answer or discussion on that now, but I'm just saying I notice there is some dissonance there.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Meyer, I think that's one of the pieces we will certainly get into as we work to implement it. And I think the strategic review pointed out, we've got some work to do as we've been talking to you about our project delivery improvements of, I think it was said in the interview, we've got 5 separate regions, right, doing things a little differently. So how are we centralizing that accountability and oversight without managing everything down to the detail from headquarters? But yeah, it's going to be a shift. And I think to Lee's point earlier on external, the act piece, I think is well said, and we're going to have to do.
Yeah, you've got some politics around that to manage.
I don't want to be on the committee anymore. Sorry.
And Vice Chair Byer, I mean, I think that's something we've started working with the area commissions on, as they've
Yes.
developed their own work plans, part of their own identification of what they want to work on, or what are the priorities, kind of more holistically within their area. And so in some ways, this could potentially help give an avenue to have some of those discussions with the department in a different way than maybe we've engaged in the past.
It'd be interesting to hear more about, and not right now, but how other states are doing that.
Not every state has acts.
Right.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, we're kind of unique.
You have a lot of advisory committees and people helping you get your jobs done.
Yes.
65?
So being respectful of our time, I just want to make sure we answered the last question that we had in the previous slide, was how does the commission want to stay abreast of our work? Do you want reports back every quarter, every month, or how would this item itself, I'm sure is going to be an agenda item you're going to see in the future, but just as I project manage and as I make sure we complete the work, how often do you want to be engaged? What do you think that should look like?
So one of the criticisms that we throw out quite often is that there's agenda items, we're not getting information quick enough, it's hard to make decisions, you know, staff is struggling with it to be able to provide us with that level of information. So I don't want to set something, I don't want the commission to set something that isn't obtainable by you. And I think that as the project manager on this, you know, on this project and moving this forward, you need to tell us too what you think is the right pace. Because we don't want to set an expectation that you can't meet, that causes a level of frustration to the team to where they're not able to achieve it because they're just so busy about getting us a report that they're missing the point of the whole process.
Good, and I appreciate that. We will have various items, just we've been talking about will be back in front of you, the audit will be back in front of you, so I'll look for opportunities maybe to tag with those and give you a broader update on how the overall effort's going as we move forward.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, not only does it make sense, Madam Chair, but I was also thinking that many of these items will report directly to me, and the hope is that we can bring them forward and say this is what we've done, and you can trust that that's complete. Others are going to be in the development phase, and we'll need your input as we go forward because they do have bigger picture consequence or connection, I should say. I would also offer that I think as we get better at the long-range planning, the ACTs actually have a better role in how their projects would then come into that sequence. And so I think that there's a synergy there, but we have to create that process around it. The last thing that I will say is one of the things that's really clear in our project development process is that if we give our project managers or our resident engineers a project that is already underfunded from the moment they start, that's the moment that they're already starting to fail. And that's unfair to them, and it creates a position where we're constantly coming back to you to say, we need something more, and you asked the right question, which is how do we get in this position? Part of the getting in that position is we're working off of estimates that we generated so early in the process that really weren't informed enough to say that they were a real estimate. The programmatic elements that we're talking about here that will take some time to put in place should improve upon that, so now our REs and our project managers have more to work with. And we'll be able to isolate the difference between what is a project management error that I might have brought forward versus what is escalation that is a programmatic impact. This should be able to define that much better in the outcome. And it's going to take us a little bit to pull this one together. This one won't be done by the end of the year, but we'll have a plan on what it could look like.
So I guess the other question is, do any of the other commissioners have a comment on that or a thought that they wanted to bring forth?
I have a comment.
Okay.
I was thinking about how to raise the issue of the acts, which I appreciate Commissioner Byer putting out there so succinctly. But these are some of our most important constituents because they're elected officials that are local around the state. And they will be looking at this wondering, have they lost some control, or what's their role going to be? How's it going to be different? And so I have a feeling that this fall, as we show up at the various acts, there's probably going to be a lot of questions. So my sense would be that if we've got some substance that we can deliver early fall, it would be really great. And then think about what the communication plan is going to be to the acts. And the other is, you know, as the 5 commissioners, we've divided them up. We need to be consistent in reporting, you know, what the plan is. So I have a feeling that this is going to be important, and I think it's going to be important relative to, you know, our budget package and all that, because, you know, our local elected officials are going to have a lot of conversation with our state legislators.
So in response to that, Commissioner, I do know that the ACT chairs are going to meet this fall, October. Okay. Yeah, they've been sending some dates to me, so we're trying to get it on the calendar. And it'll be part of that conversation. I think anytime when you change a process, there's always going to be pushback and people are going to start panicking and they're going to make a lot of assumptions. And I think that we're too early in the process, really, to say what it's going to look like. But I think that in the long run, if we can get a handle on this, I've always asked, and I've said this from when I started my career in transportation, is why are we programming out so far out in advance of money we don't know that we have? And it's constraint again. And it was always a criticism to ODOT. So I'm kind of happy to hear that we're going to look at this a little differently, because I think it needs to happen. And it'll help us in the long run, because I know the last thing any of you want to do is come before the commission and tell us that a project has overruns, that the estimate was made back in 2020 and it's now 2024, and guess what, the cost of concrete went up this much. So again, you know, I look forward to it, because I think if we can do a better job in our estimation and being able to deliver projects, it's going to make everybody feel a little bit better. Because I think that when that question came up of, do you trust ODOT? I think a lot of the mistrust of ODOT sometimes is that we're constantly saying, whoops, this costs more than we thought it was going to cost. This bridge costs more than we estimated. This project, you know, on and on and on. And so people go, they don't know what they're doing. And so, you know, I'm looking to you, Paul, because I think that, you know, if you can pull this off, you know, we're going to have a banner day. I will name a bus after you. Paul Mather bus. So. All right. Any other comments from the commissioners, or if, and you know, if there's other things you want to share with us?
I think we're done from this end, unless there's more from the commission that they want to offer.
Looks like, oh.
I just appreciate the courage. This is big stuff. This is fundamental change. And I admire you all for stepping up to it. It's a big, big task. But 5 years from now, we'll look back on it and go, you know, we're glad that we faced this and stared the beast square in the eye and said, this is what we need to do to get fixed. So I applaud you for that.
So I believe Commissioner Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Just echoing your last comment, in the bridge building industry especially, I know it's rare to be able to get a quote that has accuracy more than 30 days. There were points during the pandemic where we had all the supply chain disruption that unfortunately we're feeling a lot of the effects of now with our overrun estimates. I could get a quote for certain types of materials that was reliable for more than 12 hours. So trying to plan that far in advance can be really challenging. And I think that is a large part of some of our budget overruns. So I appreciate being cognizant of that.
Okay, with that said, I guess this is a great way to end our day because it's in a positive note, I think. So I want to thank Paula again and your team for the hard work that you did and looking at this. And yes, we have to be brave here. It's hard. But you know what? As I finish out my career, this will be a great way to finish it. So Paul, it's all on your shoulders, Either my retirement will be great or it'll be terrible. So it's all on you. All right, there we go. I don't know if you have any other comments other than tomorrow morning, we are going to start early, 9 o'clock. So, all right. With that, we're going to adjourn our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a